But in terms of listening goals, there's five I came up with, and these are really important. And the first one is increasing students' confidence. So,
Mm,
for example, if you took in a little, very short, authentic listening passage, say a recording of the news, then you had a list of questions with it. Be open and honest with the students and say you don't expect them to get everything right. And in fact, when you're writing those questions or the task, make sure it's achievable with a bit of effort. But
hmm.
don't ask them impossible things because you're just going to make them less confident, and that's not the idea. So, taking in an authentic recording but with an achievable task will build up learners' confidence, and particularly they will realize, hey, I can understand a real life English speaker. That's far more motivating than a course book recording that's been artificially written, graded to teach, say, the present perfect simple. Yeah.
Yes, yes, yes. Can we start before we move on to other
Yeah.
goals? I think you said something very important, which is this idea of really being honest with your students,
Yeah.
telling them that you don't expect full comprehension. And I don't know if you are going to agree, but I would go as far as to say that not giving them a list of comprehension questions for them to just answer,
Mm.
but
Yeah.
perhaps give them a different task where, how much did you understand? What words did you understand? And
Yeah.
maybe kind of go from there. And I find,
Absolutely.
Sheila, especially when building confidence, and I don't know if you're going to agree with me, but I'm going to ask you this. When working specifically with students who are perhaps at A1, A2, let's say A2, B1, maybe A2, not working with longer texts, I find that in a lot of the institutions that I have worked at, a lot of the listenings were 4 or 5 minutes long.
Hmm.
And when they were using authentic listening, they were using very long stretches of
Yeah.
listening, as opposed to let's work with this 1 minute passage here.
Yes. Or
Is
even
that a
shorter.
good way
Yes.
to increase their confidence?
Absolutely, and shorter is far better. But exploiting a short passage to the maximum is far better than not exploiting a much longer passage. But again, we're kind of locked in. The exam system. Generally, those recordings are 3.5 minutes long, and so that they are replicated in course books. But absolutely, with your students, just take in a very short recording, exploit it as much as possible. But
Hmm.
something I did for 14 years when I set up the listening business, but I stopped doing that for various reasons, was every morning at 10 o'clock I would record the 2 minute news, and then I would write three tasks: elementary, intermediate, and advanced level. So we're talking about 60 items. Um, Institutions were recording the same news, and then I would send through the tasks with the answers for the teachers. So it was ready made listening materials. And I did that for 14 years, which nearly killed me, but
Wow.
it was incredibly useful. And the feedback I was getting from institutions was the first time students were exposed to a real life news program, which was only 2 minutes long. Um, so just think 2 minutes with 20 items per 2 minute recording
Mm.
on average. The first time the students were absolutely traumatized, maybe got one or two questions right, but then the next time they did it, they got three or four right, and the next time five or six right. And then by the end of maybe 6 or 7 sessions, they were getting nearly all of them right.
Hmm.
And that's something I love about authentic listening because the progress is exponential. You don't need to do a lot for students to make a huge amount of progress, and you can see their confidence soar, and that's why it's so satisfying.
And you know what? I have to agree with you. I can attest to this
Mhm.
because I have recently was invited to work at a institution here in Toronto, and they said, "Oh, you're going to be teaching a listening course." And I said, "Okay." The first thing they did is they gave me a course book called Tactics for Listening, and I look at the textbook and I said, "I'm not using this."
No.
The textbook was basically based on the comprehension approach.
Hmm.
Students listen, they answer true or false questions, they
Mm.
have multiple choice questions. And I said, there's absolutely nothing here on actually teaching them to become better listeners.
No.
And you know this because Field really explore this idea that what we do in the classroom is we spend a lot more time testing the students rather than
Hmm.
teaching them. So,
Yep.
how can we actually teach people? to become better listeners? Because you mentioned
Okay.
this, the course packages, the listenings that you were doing for 14 years. A
Hmm.
teacher who wants to kind of move away from this idea of testing listening and or practice listening, which is normally what we do, and move towards teaching. What can they start doing?
Okay. I think we need to go back to the listening goals I mentioned.
Mm.
So have a very
Yes.
clear focus in your head. Why are you doing this listening? Whether it's a comprehension or any other type of listening. Why are you doing it? So the first goal would be to increase learners' confidence. So that's why I mentioned achievable tasks.
Mm-hmm.
The second one, and this is incredibly important, is automaticity. I don't know if you're familiar with that term. Yep. Okay. So I'm talking about
But do
learner
explain,
automaticity.
the listeners would enjoy
Yeah.
your explanation.
Um, okay. So in terms of learner automaticity, it's the ability to decode, which is listen to a recording, match the words that they hear, or the sounds to the words, and the words to the meaning, and then build up an understanding of that recording. Um, in, so for students, you want them to be able to do that quickly, without conscious effort, and automatically, really. So rather than struggling with every single word in a recording, be able to process it quicker. That's one thing. Um, but you also have the issue of teacher automaticity. Anybody who speaks very good English will take in a recording. They've understood it absolutely perfectly. But the nature of the sound that is actually in the input is not technically perfect sound. Right? There'll
Mm.
be sounds missed out because of elision or assimilation. Sounds will merge. Um, Linking will happen. Words will run into each other, which is why very often you get a student saying, "What does this mean?" It's actually a combination of two words.
Right.
Um, so the teacher, their problem is they don't understand what's in the recording. They've understood the recording absolutely perfectly,
Right.
but they haven't concentrated on what was there in the acoustic signal. And so they can't understand why their students don't understand because they've understood perfectly. And
Mm-hmm.
that process for the teacher to listen to what was there in the recording when all the listening we do in real life is to get the message, to understand the content, it's very, very hard to switch that automaticity off.
That's a good point.
I was working on something for ITEFL next week, and it was just a couple of minutes of a recording, but I wanted to really probe what was there in the acoustic signal, and it took me 2 hours just for a couple of minutes. I came downstairs, I was absolutely white with the conscious effort of not hearing what I expected to hear, but hearing what was actually there in the recording. Things like the word didn't had become didn't,
Mm.
government had become government, because it had already been mentioned first in its clearly articulated form, but it was reoccurring, so the speaker didn't need to emphasize it. So that's another goal. You're trying to increase your students' automaticity, and the only way to do that is with regular exposure, not the listening comprehension approach where you take something in and you play it twice and you move on to another activity. A third goal, it's only five, but the third goal is to increase students' lexical knowledge, but not just the written form of words, the orthographic form, but also how those words sound hourly in a
Mm.
stream of speech. And of course, depending on the stream of speech, they can sound quite different.
That's true.
Fourth one is learners just, when they hear a word that they don't know, they tend to panic. So what you're trying to do is encourage learners to work out the meanings of words themselves, and you do that from the co-text, the words that have been said so far, the surrounding words, which are also the co-text, and also their real-world knowledge. But as John Field says, if you're talking about a skilled listener, it's their ability to decode automatically, this automaticity I was talking about,
Mm-hmm.
not their ability to work out meaning from context. That's not a skilled listener. That's using a strategic approach, which doesn't always work. Um, I know from my experience with my late father, we'd be having chats on the phone. He was getting progressively deafer, couldn't hear a lot of the words, but from the words that he did hear, he would construct a meaning, and then I'd realise he got it dramatically wrong.
Hmm.
There is no substitute for automaticity in students being able to decode effectively. Um, uh, Fourth goal is, that is the fourth goal, for students to work out the meaning of unknown words. And finally, prominence is so important. This idea that, yes, the speaker will stress content words generally that are important to convey meaning. The words in between get swallowed up, but they're also important. So actively drawing students' attention to this feature of spoken English, which doesn't exist in lots of other languages. Okay.
Wow. So I'm
Could,
gonna see if I can remember
Leo,
the
could I?
5 goals here. So we
Okay.
Yeah,
have.
no. Oh, sorry.
Yes.
You
Go
go.
ahead,
Sorry
Mike.
about
Go
that.
ahead. I was just gonna remind everyone of the 5 goals.
Please do. Yeah.
To
Okay.
build up their confidence. So that's the
Yes.
first one.
Yeah.
Maybe
Incredibly
one.
important.
Yeah. Maybe making the tasks more achievable.
That's it. Not terribly easy, but
Right.
achievable with a certain amount of effort. And
Right.
along with that, praise. It's very important that the teacher praises them, even if, like I said, they've only got 2 or 3 answers right if you're doing comprehension out of 20, but at least they've understood something and it was a real life speaker. So, yeah, well done for that. The second one is to increase learners' automaticity,
That's
their
right.
ability to decode quickly, effectively, without effort, accurately. Yeah.
Would you say that a good way for teachers to build or help learners build that automaticity would be to perhaps work with a transcript, so
Yes.
they're constantly just trying to match
Mhm.
words, or maybe sometimes gapping
Yep.
parts where words get swallowed up or get, you know.
Yes. Absolutely. But I think we need to go on now to a combined approach to teaching listening, which I've developed, which I think would be
Okay,
helpful here.
we'll come to
And
that then. So the third
we'll
one
come
is
to that.
lexical knowledge.
Yes, but not just written, also oral. So they're
Oral, okay.
recognizing the words. This is all to do with trace theory, which I mentioned earlier. Right. The fourth one is training them to work out the meaning of unknown words, but from the cotext and from the context. And the cotext is the words that have led up to that